How well do you really know the person sleeping beside you? That's the question Danielle Carter never thought she'd have to ask herself. Not about Marcus, her husband of 7 years, the man who preached forgiveness from the pulpit every Sunday, the father who tucked their children into bed with prayers whispered in the dark. She thought she knew every piece of him. His cologne, his laugh, the way his voice softened when he talked about God's calling on his life. But on a muggy summer afternoon in Decatur, Georgia, standing in her own home with the smell of barbecue drifting through open windows, Danielle would discover that some people aren't just hiding secrets. They're hiding entire lives. The backyard was alive with the kind of joy that makes you forget, even for a moment, that the world can be cruel. Children shrieked as they chased each other through the grass, weaving between folding chairs and coolers packed with sweet tea and lemonade. The smell of ribs and chicken hung thick in the air, mingling with laughter and gospel music floating from a portable speaker perched on the patio table. Danielle Carter moved through the chaos like a conductor, refilling plates, wiping sticky fingers, making sure Mrs. Patterson from next door had enough potato salad. Her smile was wide and effortless, the kind that made people feel seen. She wore a yellow sundress that caught the light just right, her natural hair pulled back into a neat bun. Everything about her radiated warmth. "Danielle, girl, you put your foot in these ribs," someone called out, and she laughed, waving the compliment away with a modest hand. "Marcus did all the grilling," she said, nodding toward her husband at the far end of the yard. "I just seasoned them." Marcus Carter stood by the grill, tongs in hand, his white polo shirt crisp despite the Georgia heat. He was the picture of charisma, tall, with an easy smile and the kind of presence that made people lean in when he spoke. Right now, he was deep in conversation with Deacon Mills, both men laughing about something only they understood. When Marcus caught Danielle's eye across the yard, he winked. She smiled back, that familiar flutter still there after all these years. To anyone watching, and everyone was watching, because the Carters were that family, the kind everyone wanted to be, this was perfection. The cookout, the love, the life. But perfection, as Danielle would soon learn, is just another word for illusion. If you worked the night shift at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, you knew Danielle Carter. The nurses called her Danny with affection, the kind reserved for people who show up when they're exhausted and still find a way to smile. She was the one who stayed late to comfort a patient's family. The one who covered shifts when someone's childcare fell through. The one who remembered birthdays and brought homemade banana pudding to the break room. She never complains, her supervisor once said during a staff meeting. Even when she's drowning. And Danielle was drowning. Not that she'd ever admit it. Most nights, she came home near dawn, her scrubs stained with the evidence of other people's emergencies. Blood, tears, the sharp tang of disinfectant that never quite washed out. She'd slip into the house quietly, careful not to wake Marcus or the kids, and stand in the shower until the water ran cold, letting the weight of the yard drain down the pipes. Then she'd sleep for a few hours, wake up, and do it all over again. Pack lunches. Check homework. Kiss foreheads. Smile. Because that's what Danielle did. She held things together. Her identity had been built brick by brick on being needed. By her patients, by her church, by her family. She was the caregiver, the peacemaker, the woman who never said no. And somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten how to ask for help herself. "You good, Danny?" her best friend, Keisha, asked one Sunday after service. They were standing in the church parking lot, Danielle balancing a casserole dish in one hand and her daughter's backpack in the other. "I'm blessed," Danielle said automatically. The answer she always gave. Keisha studied her for a moment, those sharp eyes missing nothing. But before she could press, Marcus appeared, sliding an arm around Danielle's waist. "Ready to head home, babe?" he asked, flashing that megawatt smile. Danielle nodded, and Keisha let it go. But something in her friend's expression lingered, a question unasked, a worry unspoken. If only Keisha had pushed harder. If only Danielle had been honest. If only. From the outside, Marcus and Danielle's marriage looked like something out of a Christian romance novel. 7 years together. 2 beautiful children, Caleb, 11, sharp as a tack and obsessed with basketball, and Zoe, 8, who could talk your ear off about anything and everything. They attended Bethel Community Church every Sunday, where Marcus served as the youth pastor, mentoring teenagers and leading Bible studies with the kind of passion that made parents trust him with their kids. Pastor Marcus just has a way with young people. One mother gushed at a church potluck. My son actually wants to go to youth group now. But at home, when the lights were off and the performances ended, things were different. Marcus traveled a lot. Ministry conferences, he said. Youth retreats. Mission trips to help churches in other states get their programs off the ground. Sometimes he'd be gone for a week, maybe two. Danielle never questioned it. His work was important, after all. God's work. Still, there were moments when she felt the distance between them like a physical thing. The way he'd go quiet when his phone buzzed. The vague answers about where he'd been and who he'd seen. The nights he came home smelling like unfamiliar perfume, which he explained away with. Hugged a church sister. You know how they are. Danielle wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Because if she started pulling at that thread, what would unravel? So she smiled, packed his suitcase, kissed him goodbye, and told herself everything was fine. It was a Tuesday in early March 2021 when Danielle's phone rang. She was folding laundry in the living room, half watching a rerun of the first 48, when she saw the name on the screen, Simone. Her younger sister. Danielle's stomach tightened. She and Simone hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Not since their mother's funeral, when Simone showed up late, high, and picked a fight with an uncle over the will. Simone had always been the wild one, the one who made bad decisions and worse excuses. Danielle had spent most of her adult life trying to clean up Simone's messes, until one day she just stopped. But now, here was her name, glowing on the screen. Danielle hesitated, then answered. Simone. Hey, Danny. Simone's voice was small, almost childlike. I know it's been a minute. Yeah, it has. A pause. Then, I need help. Of course she did. Danielle closed her eyes, already bracing for the ask. What kind of help? I'm in Florida. Things didn't work out with my job, and my roommate kicked me out. I don't have anywhere to go. Simone's voice cracked, just enough to sound genuine. I was wondering if I could stay with you. Just for a little while. I promise I'll get back on my feet. Danielle's first instinct was to say no. To protect her peace, her family, the fragile balance she'd worked so hard to maintain. But then guilt crept in, hot and familiar. Simone was her sister. Her blood. And what kind of Christian turned away family in need? Let me talk to Marcus, Danielle said finally. Thank you, Danny. I swear, I won't be a burden. But she would be. Just not in the way Danielle expected. When Danielle brought it up that night over dinner, she expected resistance. Marcus had never been Simone's biggest fan. He'd called her chaotic more than once, and after the funeral incident, he'd told Danielle it was okay to set boundaries. But when she explained the situation, Marcus surprised her. We should help her, he said, setting down his fork. She's family, babe. That's what we do. Danielle blinked. You sure? I know things have been tense with her before. Everyone deserves a second chance. Marcus reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Besides, it's temporary, right? And maybe this is God's way of healing your relationship. Danielle felt a swell of gratitude. This was the man she'd married, compassionate, forgiving, generous. Thank you, she whispered. Of course. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. Something that flickered and then disappeared before she could name it. 2 days later, Marcus was in the guest room, assembling a bed frame and hanging curtains. He whistled while he worked, in a strangely good mood. Danielle stood in the doorway, watching him, and tried to ignore the faint unease curling in her stomach. He's just being kind, she told herself. Stop overthinking. But later, much later, she'd realized that Marcus hadn't been preparing a guest room. He'd been setting a trap. Simone Carter, 32 years old, petite, with the same warm brown skin and sharp cheekbones as her sister, arrived on a Saturday morning with 2 suitcases and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you so much for this, Danny, she said, pulling her sister into a hug that lasted a beat too long. I don't know what I'd do without you. It's okay, Danielle said, even though something about the hug felt off. Too tight. Too performative. Your family. Marcus appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Simone. Welcome. Marcus. Simone's smile shifted, brighter now, almost radiant. You didn't have to do all this. Nonsense. Make yourself at home. And she did. Almost too easily. The first few weeks were nice. Better than nice, actually. Danielle felt a cautious hope bloom in her chest as she and Simone fell into a rhythm. Cooking together, watching movies after the kids went to bed, talking about their childhood in that bittersweet way that felt like healing. Simone was good with Caleb and Zoe, playing board games and helping with homework. She even started attending church with them, sitting in the same pew, clapping along to the worship songs. I think this is good for her, Danielle told Keisha one afternoon. She seems different, more grounded. Keisha, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. Just keep your eyes open, Danny. People don't change overnight. But Danielle wanted to believe. She needed to believe that something broken could be made whole again. She had no idea that the cracks were already forming. It started small. It always does. Danielle was in Simone's bathroom one morning, grabbing an extra roll of toilet paper from the cabinet, when she saw it, a bottle of cologne sitting on the counter. Marcus's cologne. The expensive kind she'd bought him for Christmas, the one he only wore on special occasions. She picked it up, her heart thudding strangely in her chest. Why would Simone have this? At breakfast, she kept her voice casual. Hey, Simone, I noticed Marcus's cologne in your bathroom. Did he leave it in there by accident? Simone barely looked up from her cereal. Oh, that? Yeah, I borrowed it for a date last week. Hope that's okay. A date? Danielle forced a smile. I didn't know you were seeing anyone. It was nothing serious. Just some guy I met online. Simone shrugged. I'll give the cologne back. Danielle nodded, but the explanation sat wrong in her stomach. Why would Simone wear men's cologne to a date? And why hadn't she asked first? She told herself she was overthinking. Simone was still adjusting. It was just cologne. But then came the cufflinks. A week later, Danielle was putting away laundry in Simone's room when she saw them. The gold cufflinks she'd given Marcus for their 5th anniversary. They were sitting on Simone's dresser, next to a stack of bracelets and loose change. Danielle's hands froze mid-fold. She picked them up, her pulse roaring in her ears. These weren't just any cufflinks. They were engraved with Marcus's initials. She'd saved for months to buy them. Simone, Danielle called, her voice tight. Simone appeared in the doorway, towel drying her hair. What's up? Danielle held up the cufflinks. Why do you have these? Simone's face flickered, surprise, then something else. Oh, I found them in the laundry room. Must have fallen out of Marcus's pocket. I was going to give them back. When? I don't know, Danny. I forgot. Simone's tone sharpened. Why are you interrogating me? I'm not. Danielle stopped herself, suddenly aware of how she sounded. Paranoid. Accusatory. Never mind. Just please give them back to him. Sure. Whatever. That night, Danielle mentioned it to Marcus. He was lying in bed, scrolling through his phone, barely listening. Simone said she found your cufflinks in the laundry room, Danielle said carefully. Okay. He didn't look up. Don't you think that's strange? How would they end up there? Marcus sighed, finally setting his phone down. Babe, I don't know. Maybe they fell out when I was doing laundry. Why does it matter? It doesn't, You're being paranoid. His voice was gentle, but there was an edge beneath it. You work too much. You're exhausted. Maybe you should take a day off. Danielle stared at him, something cold settling in her chest. I'm not paranoid. I didn't say you were. He reached over, brushing a hand across her cheek. I'm just worried about you. You're carrying a lot right now. She wanted to argue, but the words tangled in her throat. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was imagining things. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, Danielle knew. Something was very, very wrong. It was 2:47 a.m. when Danielle woke to the sound of voices. She lay still for a moment, listening. Marcus was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even. But downstairs, she could hear murmuring, low and indistinct, like the hum of a television left on. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded down the stairs in bare feet. The house was dark except for a sliver of light coming from the kitchen. When she rounded the corner, she saw them, Marcus and Simone, sitting at the kitchen table. They were on opposite sides, phones in hand, both looking up at her with identical expressions of surprise. "Danny," Marcus said, standing quickly. "What are you doing up?" "I heard voices." Danielle's eyes moved between them. "What's going on?" "Just talking," Simone said smoothly. "I couldn't sleep, and Marcus came down for water. We were chatting about my job search." "At 3 a.m? Marcus crossed to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Babe, it's nothing. Go back to bed. You have work tomorrow." Danielle wanted to push, to demand answers, but exhaustion weighed her down. And maybe, just maybe, she was afraid of what she'd find if she kept digging. So she nodded, went back upstairs, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and wondered when her home had started to feel like a trap. Something's off with Marcus. Keisha said it over coffee at Danielle's kitchen table, her voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Simone had taken Caleb and Zoe to the park. Another gesture that should have felt kind but somehow didn't. Danielle looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "At church. He's been acting weird. Jumpy. And last week, when I asked him about the youth retreat, he got all defensive. Like I'd accused him of something." "He's just stressed," Danielle said automatically. "Planning events is a lot." Keisha leaned forward. "Danny, I'm not trying to start something. But you know I love you, right? And I'm telling you, something feels wrong. Has he been acting different at home?" Danielle opened her mouth to deny it, but the words stuck. Because Keisha was right. Marcus had been different. Distant. Secretive. And since Simone arrived, it had only gotten worse. "I don't know," Danielle admitted quietly. "Maybe I'm imagining it. Or maybe you're not." Keisha reached across the table, gripping her hand. "Promise me you'll trust your gut. Don't let anyone make you think you're crazy." Danielle nodded, but even as she did, doubt gnawed at her. What if she was wrong? What if this was all in her head? What if it wasn't? It was a Tuesday night when Danielle's world split open. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through Facebook after a long shift, when the notification popped up. A message from someone she didn't know. A woman named Tasha Reynolds. Danielle almost deleted it. She got random messages all the time, old high school acquaintances, MLM pitches, strangers asking for prayers. But something made her click. The message was short, blunt. "I don't know if this is the right person, but my friend is married to a man who looks exactly like your husband. His name is Marcus Carter. I'm attaching a photo. If this is him, you need to know." Danielle's breath caught. Below the message was an image, a courthouse photo, the kind taken at civil ceremonies. A man in a dark suit, smiling at the camera. And beside him, in a simple white dress, was a woman. The man was Marcus. Same face. Same smile. Same dimple in his left cheek. The woman was Simone. And at the bottom of the photo, barely visible, was a date, June 14th, 2018. Danielle stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Her hands shook. Her heart slammed against her ribs like it was trying to escape. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. But it was. Marcus, her husband, her partner, the father of her children, was married to her sister. And everything Danielle thought she knew shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. How do you survive the moment you realize your entire life has been a lie? And what happens when the people you trusted most are the ones holding the knife? Stay with us, because this story is only beginning, and the truth is far darker than anyone could have imagined. There's a special kind of hell reserved for people who discover the truth, but have to keep living the lie. Danielle Carter was living in that hell. And no one, not her neighbors, not her church family, not even her own children, had any idea. The Facebook message sat in her phone like a live grenade. She'd stared at that courthouse photo until her eyes burned, until the pixels blurred together and reformed into 1,000 unanswered questions. Marcus in a dark suit. Simone in white. June 14th, 2018. 3 years before Simone had called asking for help. 3 years into Danielle and Marcus's marriage. Her husband was a bigamist. Her sister was his second wife. And Danielle, devoted, trusting, exhausting herself for everyone, Danielle had welcomed the other woman into her home with open arms. But here's what makes this story so chilling. Danielle didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't march downstairs and demand answers. She closed the message, locked her phone, and went to bed beside her husband like nothing had changed. Because in that moment, something fundamental broke inside Danielle Carter. And what emerged in its place was something far more dangerous than rage. It was resolve. If you had seen Danielle Carter in the days following her discovery, you would have thought she was fine. Better than fine, actually. She seemed almost peaceful. On Wednesday morning, she woke at 5:30 a.m., just like always. Made coffee, packed Caleb's basketball gear and Zoe's spelling homework. She laid out Marcus's favorite tie, the navy one with thin silver stripes, and left it on the dresser with a note that said, "Have a blessed day." When Marcus came downstairs, she kissed his cheek. "Morning, babe." He smiled, none the wiser. "Morning. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get a head start on the day." If he noticed anything different in her eyes, the flatness behind her smile, the way she looked through him instead of at him, he didn't mention it. Why would he? This was Danielle. Predictable, accommodating, ever-faithful Danielle. She drove the kids to school, waving at other parents in the carpool line. At Grady Memorial, she clocked in for her shift, greeted her co-workers, and spent 12 hours tending to gunshot wounds and overdoses and the general chaos of an Atlanta ER. She held the hand of a dying man and whispered prayers over him as his heart monitor flatlined. Then she drove home, heated up leftovers, and ate dinner across from her husband and her sister like they were just a normal family. "This is really good, Danny," Simone said, her fork scraping against the plate. "You always could cook." Danielle smiled. "Thanks." Marcus reached for the cornbread. "How was work?" "Busy. Lost a patient tonight." "I'm sorry, babe." His hand found hers across the table, squeezing gently. "You carry so much." "You have no idea," Danielle thought. But what she said was, "It's okay. That's the job." After dinner, she helped Zoe with her math homework, read Caleb a chapter from his favorite book, and tucked them both into bed with kisses and whispered "I love yous." Then she went to her bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands. She opened the Facebook message again, stared at the photo. At the date, June 14th, 2018. She'd been pregnant with Zoe then. 7 months along, swollen ankles and heartburn, barely able to tie her own shoes. Marcus had been away that weekend for what he said was a youth pastor conference in Tampa. But he hadn't been at a conference. He'd been marrying her sister. Danielle's hands shook. She locked the phone, set it on the nightstand, and climbed under the covers beside Marcus, who was already snoring softly. And she stared at the ceiling until dawn. On the 4th night, Danielle started writing. She'd always been a journal person, scribbled prayers and gratitude lists, Bible verses she wanted to remember, little notes about the kids' milestones. But this was different. These weren't prayers of thanksgiving or hope. These were the prayers of a woman coming apart at the seams. She sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, and let the words pour out. "God, I don't understand. I've tried to live right. I've tried to love well. I've served you, served my family, served everyone who needed me. And this is what you allow. This is what I get for faithfulness." Her handwriting grew sharper, angrier. "How do I forgive what I can't even comprehend? How do I look at them and not see the lies? How do I keep breathing when every breath feels like swallowing glass?" She paused, pen hovering over the page. Marcus preached about love last Sunday. Said love covers a multitude of sins. But what happens when the sins are too big to cover? What happens when love isn't enough? The entries became more fragmented over the next few days, like her thoughts were fracturing. "They're laughing in the living room. I can hear them. How can they laugh?" Simone touched his arm at dinner. A nothing touch. "But I saw it. I see everything now. Zoe asked me today if I was sad. I said no. I lied to my daughter. I've become one of them. And then on the 7th night, God, why did you let me love them both? Why did you make me soft when the world is full of knives? She closed the journal, her hands trembling, and pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your sense of reality. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world, about love, about yourself. And Danielle was drowning in questions with no answers. By the end of the first week, Danielle couldn't ignore the compulsion anymore. She needed proof. Not just the photo. Anyone could Photoshop a picture. She needed evidence so undeniable that even Marcus couldn't gaslight his way out of it. So she started digging. It began with his laptop. Marcus left it open sometimes, logged into his email. Danielle waited until he was in the shower one morning, then scrolled through his inbox with shaking hands. Most of it was mundane, church business, Amazon orders, newsletters from Christian leadership sites. But then she found a folder labeled FL Ministry. Inside were emails dating back years. Messages to someone named S, talking about flights to Orlando, hotels near the courthouse, inside jokes that made Danielle's stomach churn. One email, dated May 2018, made her breath catch. Can't wait to make it official, baby. Just a few more weeks. I love you. Danielle's vision blurred. She closed the laptop before she could see more. Next, she checked his phone records. She'd always had access. They were on a family plan, and Danielle handled the bills. She pulled up the last 6 months of calls and text logs, and there it was, a Florida number that appeared dozens of times. Late-night calls. Texts at odd hours. She didn't recognize the number, but she didn't need to. The pattern was enough. Then came the second phone. She found it by accident, tucked under the driver's seat of Marcus's car when she was looking for Zoe's missing water bottle. A cheap flip phone, the kind people used for burner numbers. It was locked, but Danielle tried the obvious, Marcus's birthday. The phone opened. The text messages inside were from Simone. Miss you. Can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. She doesn't suspect anything. You were right, she trusts too much. How much longer do we have to keep this up? Danielle sat in the driveway, the phone cold in her hands, and felt the last piece of her old self crumble into dust. Because this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment. This was a conspiracy. A long con. A calculated, deliberate destruction of her life, orchestrated by the two people she loved most. And they'd been laughing about it the whole time. But here's the twisted part. Marcus and Simone had no idea that Danielle knew. They went about their days like actors in a play, performing their roles with just enough believability to keep the illusion alive. Simone made breakfast. Marcus led family devotionals. They all sat in the living room watching The Voice, voting for their favorite contestants, passing the popcorn bowl. Marcus, you're hogging the bowl, Simone teased, nudging him with her elbow. He grinned. You snooze, you lose. Danielle watched them from the armchair, her face neutral, her hands folded in her lap. She'd become an observer in her own life, watching these strangers pretend to be her family. But they weren't strangers. That was the cruelest part. She knew them. Knew Marcus's tells when he was lying, the way he touched his ear, the slight uptick in his voice. Knew that Simone always played with her hair when she was nervous. And she saw it all now. The lingering looks. The coordinated trips to the kitchen. The way Marcus would leave the room and Simone would follow 5 minutes later, both returning with convenient excuses. Just needed to grab my phone charger, Marcus would say. Was looking for a snack, Simone would add. Danielle would nod. Smile. Say nothing. Because she was playing her own role now. The oblivious wife. The trusting sister. The woman who didn't see what was right in front of her. And she played it perfectly. But inside, in the places no one could see, Danielle Carter was planning. By the second week, Marcus started to notice that something was off. It wasn't anything obvious. Danielle still smiled. Still cooked his favorite meals. Still kissed him goodnight. But there was a quality to her attention now that unsettled him. Like she was watching him a little too closely, listening a little too carefully. "You okay?" he asked one morning over coffee. "I'm fine." "Why?" "You've just been quiet." Danielle shrugged. "Tired, I guess. Work's been rough." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you should take a day off. You've been pushing yourself too hard." "Maybe." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling. That night, he mentioned it to Simone when they were alone in the garage, one of their designated safe spaces for private conversations. "Does Danny seem weird to you?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Simone frowned. "Weird how?" "I don't know. Just different. Too calm." "She's always calm, Marcus. That's who she is." "I know, but—" He ran a hand over his face. "I don't know. Maybe I'm paranoid." Simone stepped closer, her hand finding his chest. "You're fine. She doesn't know anything. She's too busy taking care of everyone else to notice." Marcus wanted to believe her. But the unease lingered, a splinter he couldn't dig out. What he didn't realize was that Danielle's calm wasn't submission. It was the eye of a hurricane. And the storm was coming. By the third week, Danielle had stopped answering Keisha's calls. Her best friend had been texting almost daily. "You okay? Haven't heard from you. Let's grab lunch." But Danielle couldn't bring herself to respond. Because how do you explain to someone that your entire life is a lie? How do you say those words out loud without disintegrating? So she didn't. She let the messages pile up unanswered and avoided Keisha at church by slipping out before the service ended. She pulled away from the kids too, even though it broke her heart. Caleb kept asking if she was mad at him. Zoe crawled into her lap one night and whispered, "Mommy, are you sad?" "No, baby," Danielle lied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Mommy's just tired." But Zoe didn't look convinced. Children always know. At work, Danielle went through the motions. She administered IVs, took vitals, comforted families. But her coworkers noticed the change. "Danny, you good?" one of the nurses asked during a break. "Yeah, just a lot going on at home." "Anything you want to talk about?" "No, I'm fine." That phrase, "I'm fine," had become her shield. 2 words that kept people at arm's length, that prevented anyone from seeing the rot spreading inside her. Because if she let anyone in, if she spoke the truth out loud, it would become real. And Danielle wasn't ready for it to be real. Not yet. So she carried the secret alone, and it crushed her a little more each day. She stopped eating. Food tasted like ash. She'd lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks, and her scrubs hung loose on her frame. At night, she'd lie in bed beside Marcus, her body rigid, and will herself not to scream. The weight of the secret was unbearable. But the alternative, exposing it, dealing with the fallout, watching her children's world explode, felt even worse. So Danielle did what she'd always done. She held it all inside. And slowly, quietly, she came apart. It happened on a Thursday night, 2.5 weeks after the Facebook message. Danielle had been planning to wait longer, to gather more evidence, to figure out her next move. But that night, something inside her snapped. Marcus had just come home from a deacon's meeting, smelling like cologne and smiling that easy smile. He kissed her cheek, asked about dinner, and went upstairs to change. Danielle followed him. She closed the bedroom door behind her, locked it, and leaned against it. Marcus was unbuttoning his shirt, humming under his breath. "Marcus." Something in her tone made him turn. "Yeah." She pulled out her phone, opened the Facebook message, and held it up. "Is this real?" The color drained from his face. For a split second, less than a heartbeat, she saw the truth in his eyes. Panic. Guilt. Fear. Then the mask slammed back into place. "What is that?" he asked, stepping closer. "You tell me." He squinted at the screen, his expression shifting to confusion. "Where did you get this?" "Someone sent it to me. A woman in Orlando. She says her friend is married to you." Danielle's voice was eerily calm, each word precise. "She says the woman in this photo is Simone, and that you got married on June 14th, 2018. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. "Danielle, that's insane. This is obviously fake." Is it? Yes. Look at it. Anyone can Photoshop a picture. This is someone trying to mess with us. Maybe someone from Simone's past, I don't know, but it's not real. Danielle took a step forward. Then explain the emails. Explain the phone calls to a Florida number. Explain the second phone in your car with text messages from Simone. His face went still. You went through my car? Answer the question. You had no right. Answer the question. The shout tore out of her, raw and jagged, and Marcus flinched. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Danielle's ragged breathing. Then Marcus's expression shifted. Hardened. You're losing your mind. Excuse me? You're paranoid. Obsessive. You've been acting strange for weeks, and now you're accusing me of, what? Bigamy? Do you hear how insane that sounds? Danielle stared at him, and in that moment, she saw it clearly. This wasn't shock or confusion. This was strategy. He was pivoting, reframing, turning her discovery into evidence of her instability. Gaslighting. Textbook gaslighting. I saw the emails, Marcus. I saw the texts. Simone is your sister. Of course we text. Of course we talk. She lives here, Danielle. What do you expect? The text said. I don't care what they said. You're reading into things that aren't there because you're exhausted and stressed, and you've worked yourself into some paranoid delusion. His voice was rising now, defensive and sharp. Maybe you need to see someone. A therapist. Because this, he gestured at her, at the phone, at the space between them. This isn't healthy. Danielle felt the walls closing in. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone at him, to make him admit the truth. But a small, terrible voice in her head whispered, what if he's right? What if you're seeing things that aren't there? No, she wasn't crazy. The photo was real. The emails were real. The second phone was real. But Marcus was convincing. He'd always been convincing. That's how he'd hidden this for years. You're lying, Danielle said, her voice breaking. I'm not. And the fact that you think I am breaks my heart. He moved toward her, reaching for her hands, but she stepped back. Don't touch me. Danielle. Get out. This is my bedroom too. Get out. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, then turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Danielle sank onto the bed, her whole body shaking. And in that moment, she understood something that would change everything. There was no reasoning with him. No confronting him. No making him tell the truth. The man she'd married, the man she'd loved, trusted, built a life with didn't exist. He never had. He was a construct, a mask, a performance designed to deceive. And Danielle had spent 7 years loving a ghost. After the confrontation, something fundamental broke in Danielle Carter. She stopped trying to hold it together. Stopped pretending. Stopped sleeping. The nightmares started that week, vivid, visceral, inescapable. She dreamed of drowning, of being buried alive, of Marcus and Simone standing over her grave laughing. She'd wake gasping, drenched in sweat, and lie in the dark listening to Marcus's breathing beside her, and wonder how she'd gotten here. During the day, she felt like a ghost. She'd be at work, inserting in 4 or checking vitals, and suddenly realize she'd lost 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whole chunks of time swallowed by dissociation. Her coworkers started giving her concerned looks, but she avoided eye contact, avoided conversations, avoided everything. At home, watching Caleb and Zoe became unbearable. They still adored Marcus, still ran to hug him when he came home, still hung on his every word during family devotionals. And Danielle had to sit there and watch, knowing what she knew, unable to protect them without destroying them. How do you tell your children that their father is a liar? That their aunt is his second wife? That everything they believe about their family is fiction? You don't. You can't. So Danielle said nothing and felt pieces of herself die every day. On the 4th Sunday after her discovery, Marcus preached a sermon on forgiveness. Danielle sat in the 3rd pew, Caleb on one side and Zoe on the other, and listened to her husband talk about grace. About mercy. About the power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. Sometimes, Marcus said, his voice ringing through the sanctuary, the people closest to us hurt us the most. Family. Friends. The ones we trust. And it's in those moments that God calls us to do the impossible, to forgive anyway. The congregation murmured in agreement. Someone shouted, "Amen." Marcus's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Danielle. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the wrong. It's about releasing the bitterness. It's about trusting that God will handle the justice. Danielle's hands clenched in her lap. She felt Keisha glance at her from across the aisle, concern etched on her face, but Danielle kept her eyes forward, her expression blank. After the service, people swarmed Marcus, shaking his hand, thanking him for the message. Danielle stood to the side with the kids, watching the performance, and wondered if anyone else could see the irony. This man, this liar, this fraud, this predator in pastor's clothing, was being praised for wisdom he didn't have, grace he didn't extend, integrity he'd never possessed. And no one knew. No one suspected. Because Marcus Carter was that good. That afternoon, Keisha cornered Danielle in the church parking lot. "Danny, wait." Danielle turned, forcing a smile. "Hey, don't hate me. What's going on with you?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've lost weight. You're avoiding me. And today, during Marcus's sermon, you looked like..." Keisha paused, choosing her words carefully. "Like you wanted to set the building on fire." Danielle almost laughed. Because that was exactly what she'd been thinking. "I'm just tired, Keisha. Work's been crazy. This isn't about work." Keisha stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Is it Marcus? Is something going on with him?" For a moment, one fragile, dangerous moment, Danielle almost told her. Almost opened her mouth and let the truth spill out like poison. But then she saw Zoe running toward them, pigtails bouncing, and the words died in her throat. "I'm fine," Danielle said again. "Really? I just need some rest." Keisha didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Okay. But I'm here. You know that, right? Whatever you need." "I know." But Danielle didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out, because there were some truths too heavy to share, some burdens too dark to pass on. So she carried it alone, and felt herself sink deeper into the abyss. One night, Danielle Googled bigamy laws in Georgia. She sat in her car in the Grady Memorial parking lot after her shift, the engine idling, and read through legal statute after legal statute. Bigamy was illegal, yes. A felony, in fact. Marcus could face prison time if convicted. But then she read the comments on a legal forum, written by people who'd been through it. "The trial took 3 years and bankrupted me. My kids were subpoenaed. They had to testify against their father. Even after he was convicted, I didn't get closure. Just trauma." Danielle's hands trembled on the steering wheel. She imagined Caleb and Zoe on a witness stand, lawyers interrogating them about their father. She imagined the church finding out, the whispers, the judgment. She imagined her life, her children's lives, dissected in public for years. And for what? So Marcus could serve a few years, and Simone could walk away with her reputation intact? So Danielle could be painted as the vindictive ex-wife who destroyed a family? The system wasn't built for people like her. It was built for people with time and money and emotional reserves she didn't have. So she closed the browser, put the car in drive, and went home to the house where her husband and his other wife were waiting. Because there was no way out. Not one that didn't sacrifice her children on the altar of justice. She was trapped. In the 4th week, Marcus turned up the heat. He'd been watching Danielle carefully since their confrontation, and he knew something was wrong. She was too quiet, too distant, too dangerous. So he did what abusers do best. He weaponized her compassion. "Simone's thinking about leaving," he mentioned casually one night after dinner. Danielle looked up from the dishes. "What?" "She thinks you're upset with her. That maybe she's overstayed her welcome." "I haven't said anything." "You don't have to. She can feel it." Marcus leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I told her she's family, that we want her here. But I think it would help if you reassured her." Danielle stared at him, incredulous. He was asking her, the betrayed wife, to comfort her husband's second wife. To make the other woman feel welcome in the home they'd infiltrated like thieves. The audacity was breathtaking. "I'll talk to her," Danielle heard herself say. Marcus smiled. "Thank you, babe. You're so good with people. That's one of the things I love most about you." Danielle turned back to the sink before he could see her face. Because in that moment, she wanted to hurt him. Wanted to pick up the knife from the cutting board and make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But she didn't. She finished the dishes, went upstairs, locked herself in the bathroom and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. Hollow-eyed, gaunt, barely holding on. And Danielle realized with chilling clarity, she couldn't keep doing this. Living this lie. Swallowing this poison. Something had to give. June 12th, 2022, it was a Sunday. A perfect, unremarkable Sunday. Danielle woke early, made breakfast, got the kids ready for church. She wore her yellow dress, the one everyone always complimented. Her hair was done. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like herself again. Like the old Danielle before the discovery, before the drowning. At church, she sang the hymns, hugged the deacons' wives, smiled at the children running through the fellowship hall. She was radiant, glowing, present in a way she hadn't been in weeks. Keisha noticed immediately. "You look good, Danny. You feeling better?" "I am," Danielle said. And she meant it, because she'd made a decision. And decisions, even terrible ones, bring a kind of peace. That afternoon, she called Keisha from her car. "Hey girl," Keisha answered. "What's up?" "I just wanted to say thank you." Danielle's voice was calm, serene. "For being there for me. For caring." "Of course. Always." A pause. "You sure you're okay? You sound different." "I'm fine. I've just been praying a lot. About everything. And I think I've figured out what I need to do." "What do you need to do?" "I'm going to make things right." Keisha felt a chill run down her spine. Something in Danielle's tone, too calm, too resolved, set off alarms. "Danny, what does that mean?" "It means I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make sure everyone's okay." "Danielle, I have to go, Keisha. Tell my kids I love them more than anything." "Okay." "Wait, what?" "Danny." But the line was already dead. Keisha stared at her phone, her heart pounding, and immediately called back. No answer. She texted. Nothing. Then she did what she should have done weeks ago. She called 911. But by the time police responded to the welfare check, it was too late. In those final hours, Danielle moved with purpose. She wrote letters to Caleb and Zoe, long, heartbreaking letters explaining that mommy loved them, that none of this was their fault, that they deserved so much better than the hand they'd been dealt. She organized family photos into albums, labeled them, set them aside where they'd be found. She sat in her car in the driveway, engine off, and stared at the house where she'd built her life. The house where she'd been betrayed. The house where her sister and her husband had plotted her destruction and called it love. And she made a choice. Not out of hate, not out of vengeance, but out of an exhaustion so profound, a betrayal so complete, that she couldn't see any other way out. Because here's the truth about people like Danielle. People who carry everyone's pain, who absorb everyone's needs, who never ask for help. They don't know how to unload the weight. They only know how to carry it until they collapse. And on June 12th, 2022, Danielle Carter collapsed. But she didn't collapse alone. What happens when the strongest person in the room finally breaks? What does a woman do when the system meant to protect her fails? When the people she trusted most are the ones wielding the knife? And most haunting of all, could anyone have stopped this? Or was she already lost the moment she chose silence over truth? What does it sound like when a family stops breathing? That's the question that haunted the officers who arrived at 4247 Magnolia Drive in Decatur, Georgia, on the evening of June 12, 2022. They'd received a frantic 911 call from a woman named Keisha Brooks, who said her best friend had called her with what sounded like a goodbye. The dispatcher had noted the urgency in Keisha's voice, the way she kept repeating, "Something's wrong. Please, you have to get there now." 2 patrol cars pulled up to the modest brick house just after 6 p.m. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. From the outside, everything looked normal. The flowers Danielle had planted in the spring were still blooming. A basketball sat abandoned in the driveway. Wind chimes hanging from the porch swayed gently in the breeze, their melody incongruent with what was about to be discovered. Officer James Mitchell knocked on the front door. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. He rang the doorbell. Knocked again, harder this time, announcing himself. Decatur Police. We're here for a welfare check. Silence. The kind that feels heavy, that presses against your chest. Mitchell looked at his partner, Officer Sandra Reeves, and something unspoken passed between them. Years on the job teach you to trust your instincts, and both of them felt it. Something was very, very wrong. We're coming in, Mitchell called out, trying the door handle. Locked. They forced entry. And what they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The details of what police discovered that evening are not something we need to linger on. This isn't about sensationalism or the mechanics of violence. This is about the devastating culmination of betrayal, pain, and a woman who saw no other way out. What matters is this, for lives ended that day. Danielle Carter, age 34. Marcus Carter, age 36. Simone Carter, age 32. And 8-year-old Zoe, who had asked her mother just days before if she was sad. The officers found them in different parts of the house, each discovery more heartbreaking than the last. The physical evidence suggested planning, not passion. This wasn't a spontaneous eruption of rage. This was the final act of someone who had made a terrible, irrevocable decision. But here's what broke Officer Reeves when she recounted it later. They found 11-year-old Caleb hiding in his bedroom closet, headphones on, alive. He'd been listening to music, oblivious to the horror unfolding around him, until he heard the police breaking down the door. When they pulled him out, shaking and confused, asking where his mom was, Reeves had to hold him while he screamed. Had to watch his entire world shatter in real time. That sound, a child realizing his family is gone, is something you never forget. In the hours and days that followed, detectives pieced together a story so twisted, so meticulously constructed, that even seasoned investigators were stunned. They found Danielle's journal first, sitting open on the kitchen table like she'd wanted someone to read it. Page after page of prayers, questions, anguish. The final entry, dated June 12, 2022 at 3:47 p.m. reads simply, "Forgiveness is for those who ask." They never did. God forgive me. They found the Facebook message saved on her phone, the courthouse photo of Marcus and Simone, dated June 14, 2018. They found printed emails, highlighted phone records, a flash drive containing copies of text messages between Marcus and Simone that detailed a conspiracy so calculated it made investigators' blood run cold. But the most damning evidence came from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation when they ran a full background check on Marcus Carter. 2 marriage licenses. 2 legal marriages. One to Danielle Marie Johnson on August 15, 2015, in Fulton County, Georgia. Another to Simone Victoria Johnson on June 14, 2018, in Orange County, Florida. Marcus Carter was a bigamist, and he'd been living a double life for over 4 years. Detective Raymond Cooper, lead investigator on the case, later told reporters, "I've been doing this for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like it. The level of deception, the planning, the sheer audacity, it's almost incomprehensible. This man was preaching about family values and integrity while maintaining 2 complete families in 2 different states." The investigation revealed that Marcus had used his position as youth pastor as cover. Ministry trips to Florida were actually visits to his second wife. Church conferences were weekends spent in Orlando. He'd told Simone he was traveling for consulting work when he was home in Georgia with Danielle and the kids. Financial records showed he'd been siphoning money from the church's youth program fund. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. He'd maxed out credit cards in both Danielle's and Simone's names, leaving them both with debt they didn't know existed. And then there were the text messages between Marcus and Simone, recovered from the burner phone police found in Marcus's car. Messages that revealed Simone hadn't just known about Danielle. She'd been complicit in the entire scheme. How much longer do we have to keep this up? Simone had texted 3 weeks before her death. I'm tired of pretending to be the struggling little sister. When do I get to be your wife for real? Marcus had responded, soon, baby. She's starting to suspect something, but she won't do anything. She's too weak. Too afraid of what people will think. That text message, more than anything else, told investigators what they needed to know. This wasn't a tragic misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, cruel manipulation of a woman who'd spent her entire life caring for others. And when she finally discovered the truth, when she finally reached her breaking point, there was no one there to catch her. The news hit Decatur like a bomb. Within hours, reporters descended on Magnolia Drive, their satellite trucks clogging the quiet residential street. Neighbors who'd attended barbecues at the Carter home, who'd watched Caleb and Zoe play in the yard, who'd listened to Marcus preach on Sundays, they were all confronted with an impossible truth. The family they thought they knew had never existed. At Bethel Community Church, the congregation was in crisis. How do you reconcile the man who mentored your teenagers, who led Bible studies, who spoke so eloquently about grace and redemption, with a bigamist and a fraud? How do you trust your own judgment after being so completely deceived? The church held an emergency meeting 3 days after the tragedy. Senior pastor Leonard Michaels, his voice breaking, addressed a packed sanctuary. We are all struggling to understand, to reconcile what we knew, or thought we knew, with what we've learned. Marcus Carter deceived us all. But we must not, forget that Danielle was a victim long before that final day. But not everyone agreed. The community fractured along painful lines. Some blamed Danielle. How could she hurt those babies? One church member said to a reporter. No matter what Marcus did, those children were innocent. She had other options. Others saw her as a victim pushed beyond her limits. She was drowning, and we all just watched, another neighbor said, tears streaming down her face. We saw her smile and assumed she was fine. But she wasn't fine. She was dying inside, and we missed it. The debate raged online, in living rooms, at dinner tables across Atlanta. Was Danielle Carter a victim or a villain? Was she driven to madness by unbearable betrayal? Or did she make a monstrous choice? The truth, as it often is, was more complicated than either narrative. But no one was more haunted by what happened than Keisha Brooks. She replayed that final phone call in her mind constantly. Danielle's voice, too calm, too resolved. I'm going to make things right. Why hadn't she pushed harder? Why hadn't she driven over there immediately instead of calling 911? 2 weeks after the tragedy, Keisha sat down for an interview with a local journalist, hoping that sharing her story might prevent someone else's friend from slipping through the cracks. Danny was the strongest person I knew, Keisha said, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank. She carried everyone. Patients at the hospital, people at church, her family. She never complained. Never asked for help. And I think we all just assumed she was fine because she seemed fine. The journalist asked if there were warning signs. Looking back, yes, 1,000 of them. But in the moment, Keisha shook her head. She was so good at hiding. And I think part of me didn't want to see, because if I saw, I'd have to acknowledge that something was deeply wrong. And I didn't know how to fix that. She paused, tears welling up. The worst part is that she told me. Not in words, but in every pulled-away conversation, every declined invitation, every I'm fine that clearly wasn't fine. She was screaming for help in the quietest possible way. And I heard it, but I didn't listen. Keisha's guilt is something she'll carry forever. But it's also a reminder, a painful, necessary reminder, that the people who seem the strongest are often the ones closest to breaking. In the months following the tragedy, forensic psychologist Dr. Amara Chen was brought in to conduct what's called a psychological autopsy, an analysis of Danielle's mental state leading up to that final day. Dr. Chen's report, later cited in multiple journals on trauma and domestic abuse, painted a devastating picture. Danielle Carter experienced what we call acute psychological trauma triggered by compounded betrayal. Dr. Chen explained in a lecture at Emory University. She discovered that the two people she trusted most, her husband and her sister, had conspired against her for years. This wasn't a single act of infidelity. This was a sustained, calculated deception that erased her reality. But it went deeper than betrayal. Danielle's entire identity had been built on being the caregiver, the strong one, the person who solved everyone's problems. When her own life fell apart, she had no framework for asking for help. Women, particularly Black women, are socialized to be endlessly strong, Dr. Chin continued, to carry burdens without complaint, to put everyone else's needs before their own. And when they finally break under that weight, society is shocked. But we shouldn't be. We created the conditions for that collapse. Dr. Chen's report noted that Danielle had shown signs of severe depression, dissociation, and traumatic stress in the weeks leading up to June 12th. She'd lost significant weight, stopped sleeping, pulled away from support systems. But because she continued to function, going to work, caring for her children, maintaining appearances, no one intervened. She was drowning in plain sight, Dr. Chen said. And we all just watched her sink. The question Dr. Chen's report raised, the question that haunts everyone who knew Danielle, is this: could it have been prevented? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, if someone had noticed. If someone had pushed past her, "I'm fine," and demanded the truth. If the systems meant to protect people like Danielle, mental health resources, legal protections for victims of fraud and abuse, had been accessible and effective. But also no, because by the time Danielle discovered the truth, she'd already been broken. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was existential. It erased her sense of self, her reality, her ability to trust her own judgment. And when you're that far gone, when you're that deep in the darkness, sometimes there's no way back. Today, Caleb Carter is 14 years old. He lives with his maternal aunt in a quiet suburb outside Atlanta, far from Magnolia Drive and the memories that haunt it. He's in therapy, intensive, trauma-focused therapy that will likely continue for years. His therapist says he's resilient, that he has a chance at a normal life, but the scars of that day will never fully heal. "I miss my mom," Caleb said in one session, his voice small. "I miss my sister. I'm angry at my mom for what she did, but I also understand that she was hurting. And I hate that I understand it. I hate that I have to carry this." Caleb's story is one of survival, but also of profound loss. He lost his entire family in a single day, his mother, his father, his aunt, his sister. And he has to grow up knowing that the adults in his life, the people who were supposed to protect him, failed spectacularly. His aunt has kept Danielle's letters for him, the ones she wrote before that final day, explaining how much she loved him, how none of this was his fault. But Caleb hasn't been ready to read them yet. Maybe he never will be. He's building a new life, his aunt says. And I'm doing everything I can to help him. But some days, I see him staring out the window, and I know he's back there. In that house. And I don't know how to bring him back. 4247, Magnolia Drive still stands. Empty. Dark. Untouched since that June evening. No one wants to buy it. No one wants to live in the house where a family died. So it sits, windows boarded up, lawn overgrown. A physical reminder of what happens when secrets become unbearable. Neighbors say they sometimes see flowers by the driveway. Bouquets left by people who knew Danielle, who wanted to honor not just the victims, but the woman who carried too much. There's a small memorial there now. Photos of Danielle, Marcus, Simone, and little Zoe. Notes from community members. You are not forgotten. You deserved better. Rest in peace. But the most haunting element is a copy of Danielle's journal entry, laminated and placed among the flowers. Forgiveness is for those who ask. They never did. God forgive me. Those words encapsulate everything. The pain, the betrayal, the final desperate act of a woman who saw no other way out. Danielle Carter was a woman who loved deeply, gave endlessly, and trusted completely. She was a dedicated nurse, a devoted mother, a loyal friend. She was the kind of person who held everyone else's pain but never shared her own. And in the end, that's what destroyed her. Not just the betrayal, though that was catastrophic, but the weight of carrying that betrayal alone. The inability to ask for help. The belief that being strong meant suffering in silence. This story isn't just about bigamy or deception. It's about what happens when we demand that people, especially women, especially caregivers, be endlessly resilient without offering them a place to rest. It's about the danger of secrets, the poison of silence, the way betrayal doesn't just break hearts. It shatters identities, erases realities, destroys the very foundation of trust that human beings need to survive. Could anyone have stopped it? Could Keisha have pushed harder? Could the church have noticed? Could Danielle have reached out? Maybe. But the more important question is, what are we going to do differently? How do we create spaces where people feel safe admitting they're not okay? How do we teach people, especially those who've spent their lives caring for others, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom? How do we recognize when someone is drowning in plain sight? Because there are Danielas all around us. People who smile while they're suffering. People who carry impossible burdens because they believe they have no choice. People who are one devastating discovery away from a breaking point. And if we don't learn to see them, to reach them, to offer them a lifeline before it's too late, then Danielle's story will repeat itself. Again and again and again. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were carrying a secret too heavy to hold? Have you ever watched someone you love suffer in silence and not known how to help? Have you ever been the person who said, "I'm fine," when you were anything but? Drop a comment below. Share your story. Because maybe, just maybe, if we start talking about the weight we carry, we can learn to carry it together. And maybe that's how we prevent the next tragedy. If you found this story important, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. And remember, the strongest thing you can ever do is admit when you're not okay. Don't wait until it's too late. Take care of each other. And please take care of yourselves.